He quit his job because of his boss, and he thought that was the end of it. 18 months of cold silences, canceled dinners with his daughter, late nights that stole every ordinary evening he had left, and he finally walked out of that glass tower for good, certain he'd never see her office again. But that same night, past 11, someone knocked on his door. And when he opened it, his ex-boss was standing there in the rain, a suitcase at her feet, a taxi waiting behind her. Nothing about her arrival made sense. Malcolm Reed was a broad-shouldered black father whose quiet brown eyes usually made people lower their voices instead of raising them. He had learned patience while raising Zuri alone, but patience was not surrender. That morning, the distinction mattered. Malcolm Reed had rehearsed the resignation speech in the shower that morning, in the elevator, in the bathroom mirror on the 41st floor of the Brooks Meridian Tower. By the time he stood in front of Simone Brooks's glass office, none of it came out the way he planned. "I'm done," he said. "Effective today." Simone was a striking black woman who wore authority like tailored armor. Her deep brown skin seemed almost luminous against the pale glass and steel of the office, while every careful line of her posture warned the room not to mistake beauty for softness. Simone didn't look up from her screen right away. She finished the line she was typing, the way she always did, like his entire existence could wait a few extra seconds for her convenience. When she finally lifted her eyes, they were the same flat, unreadable gray they'd been for the 18 months he'd worked as her executive operations manager. "You have a 9 o'clock with the Charlotte investors tomorrow," she said. "You booked that flight yourself. Someone else can go. No one else knows the deck." "Then you'll have to learn it," Malcolm said, and something in his own voice surprised him, a steadiness he hadn't expected to find. "I missed her school play last week because you needed the Q3 numbers redone twice. I missed her dentist appointment because you scheduled a call over it and didn't ask if I could move it. I have a 6-year-old at home, Simone, and I am done building my life around whatever mood you're in on a given Tuesday." For a moment, something moved behind her eyes, quick, gone before he could name it. Then her face closed back up, smooth as glass. "If that's your decision," she said, "it is. HR will process your final check by Friday." He'd wanted her to argue. He hated himself a little for wanting that, for some buried part of him that had hoped she'd say something, anything, that wasn't a logistics answer. Instead, she turned back to her screen, and Malcolm understood, not for the first time, that he'd spent a year and a half working for a woman who treated people like line items. Before leaving, Malcolm stopped at the empty desk where he had eaten too many dinners from cardboard containers. He deleted no files and took no company property. He simply looked once at the calendar crowded with obligations that had swallowed birthdays, parent conferences, and bedtime stories. Then he removed every reminder from his phone. The small chime of each canceled alert sounded like a lock opening. He walked out of the Brooks Meridian Tower at 4 o'clock in the afternoon with a cardboard box holding a picture of his daughter, a chipped Braves mug, and nothing else worth keeping. The city was already gray with the kind of low cloud that meant rain by evening, and he didn't feel triumphant. He felt like he'd been carrying something heavy for so long that setting it down left his arms shaking. His daughter Zuri was staying with his sister Tasha that week while he sorted out the fallout of quitting a job with no backup plan. And when he picked her up that evening, she ran at him full speed, arms out, hair still smelling like Tasha's lavender shampoo, instead of the strawberry kind Zuri liked. "Did you tell your boss lady off?" Zuri asked, because 6-year-olds ask things like that. "I told her I quit." "Good," Zuri said, with the total certainty of someone who had heard her father on the phone at 11 o'clock at night more times than any kid should. "She was mean." Malcolm didn't correct her. He wasn't sure Simone Brooks was mean exactly. Mean would have been simpler. What she was cold in a way that made you doubt whether there was anything warm underneath it all, and controlling in a way that made you feel like a tool she kept sharp for her own use and put away when she was finished. Tasha had watched her brother grow thinner through the long months at Brooks Meridian. She pressed a container of stew into his hands and reminded him that being unemployed for one evening was not the same as being defeated. Malcolm promised he knew the difference. Zuri squeezed his fingers in the elevator, as if she understood that grown men sometimes needed someone smaller to lead them home. He got Zuri fed, bathed, and in a bed by 8:30, read her 2 chapters of the book about the dog who solved mysteries, and sat in a small kitchen afterward with a beer he didn't finish, doing math on the back of an envelope that told him he had 11 weeks of savings if he was careful. The rain started around 9 o'clock. By 10 o'clock, it was coming down hard enough that he could hear it against the windows over the sound of the television he wasn't really watching. The knock came at 11:40. Malcolm almost didn't answer it. It was late, and Zuri was asleep, and the building's buzzer downstairs hadn't gone off, which meant someone had gotten in behind another tenant or was already inside the building. He looked through the peephole and went completely still. Simone Brooks stood in his hallway in a white shirt soaked through from the walk between the taxi and the door. Her dark hair plastered against her jaw. A suitcase beside her on the worn carpet. Through the window at the end of the hall, he could see a yellow cab idling at the curb below. Headlights blurred by the rain, like it was waiting to see if she'd come back out. He opened the door because there wasn't a version of himself that could have left her standing there. "Simone, I know how this looks," she said. Her voice, always so level in the office, had a thread of something in it now that he'd never heard from her before. Not quite panic, something closer to a person standing at the edge of a decision they'd been putting off for a very long time. "I know I have no right to be here. It's midnight. Tell me what happened. I need somewhere to stay." She said it fast, like ripping off a bandage, and then immediately looked like she regretted the bluntness of it. "Not because of the company. Not because I need anything signed or reviewed or fixed. I know that's what you'd assume, and you'd have every reason to assume it, because that's who I've let you think I am." Malcolm glanced at the suitcase, at her ruined shoes, at the way she was gripping the handle of the bag like it was the only steady thing in the hallway. "You have a penthouse on West Pace's Ferry Road," he said. "You have 3 assistants and a car service that could put you anywhere in Atlanta in 10 minutes. I need to understand why you came to my door." Simone's jaw tightened. Rain dripped from the ends of her hair onto her collarbone, and she didn't wipe it away. "Because it isn't safe for me there tonight," she said, "and because the reason I've been the way I've been with you for 18 months has nothing to do with the company at all. And I'm not going to be able to say that to you standing in a hallway with a taxi meter running downstairs." Something in Malcolm's chest went tight in a way that had nothing to do with anger, though the anger was still there, banked under something newer. "Simone," he said, "I have a 6-year-old asleep down that hallway." "I know," she replied. "I'm not." He stopped, ran a hand over his jaw, tried to find a version of this sentence that didn't sound like he was already letting her in, even though some part of him already had. "I can't have this be complicated," he said. "Not tonight. Not with her here." "I'm not asking to complicate anything," Simone said. Her eyes, for the first time since he'd known her, looked less like glass and more like water, something that could actually break. "I'm asking for a couch and an hour of your time, and if you tell me to leave after that, I'll go, and I won't come back to your door again. But I've spent a year and a half being the person you needed to hate in order to keep you both safe, and I would rather you know the truth and despise me for it than keep thinking I'm just cruel." The cab honked once, softly, from the street below. Neither of them looked toward the window. "Tell me what you were keeping us safe from," Malcolm said. Simone's hand tightened on the suitcase handle until her knuckles went pale. "For my brother," she said. Darius Brooks was a black man with Simone's proud cheekbones and their father's commanding height, though resentment had sharpened both into something severe. Malcolm had met Darius Brooks exactly 4 times in 18 months. Always in passing, always in the kind of expensive suit that made a person smile look sharper than it was. He was Simone's stepbrother, technically the son from her father's second marriage, and he ran the shipping and logistics arm of the family holding company the way some men ran casinos, with a smile for the room and a different math running underneath it. "He's your COO?" Malcolm said slowly. "Tell me what Darius has to do with any of this." "Can I come in?" Simone said, not quite a question. "And I'll tell you everything, and then you can decide what you want to do with it." Malcolm looked at her for a long moment, rain still running off her sleeve onto his doormat, and thought about the 11 weeks of savings on the envelope in his kitchen, and the 6-year-old asleep behind him who had cheered when he quit this woman's company, and the 18 months of late nights and short answers, and a coldness that had never once, He realized now, standing here, actually made him stop wanting to understand her. He stepped back from the door. 1 hour, he said, and you keep your voice down. She's a light sleeper. Simone nodded and rolled her suitcase over the threshold, like she was carrying more than clothes in it, like the weight of it had been sitting on her for longer than tonight. Malcolm found an old towel and set it beside her without ceremony. Simone dried her face, then stared at the faded family photographs on his refrigerator. Every picture showed black joy in ordinary forms. Zuri missing a front tooth, Tasha laughing over a birthday cake, Malcolm holding his newborn daughter with terror and devotion sharing the same expression. The images seemed to disarm her more completely than anger could have done. Inside, under the kitchen light, with her hair dripping onto his floor and her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't asked for, but he'd made anyway, out of some reflex he didn't examine too closely, Simone Brooks looked less like the woman who ran a 9-figure company and more like someone who had been holding her breath for a very long time and had finally, at the worst possible hour, let it out. 18 months ago, she said, before you ever walked in my office for that interview, my father died and left me a company that my brother believes should have been his. He has spent every year since trying to prove I can't run it. And he does that by finding the people I trust and making sure they don't stay trusted for long. You were the 4th operations manager I hired in 2 years. The other 3 didn't leave because of me. Tell me what happened to them. Darius happened to them, Simone said. Fabricated expense reports. A leaked memo that looked like it came from their desk. One of them lost his next job over a reference Darius, made sure got poisoned. I watched it happen 3 times before I understood the pattern. And by the time you started, I'd made a decision that I'm not proud of. Tell me the decision you made. To make myself the reason you'd want to leave, Simone said, before Darius could make himself the reason you'd never work again. Malcolm sat back slowly, the beer he'd forgotten about going warm on the counter beside him. You're telling me the late nights, the calls over dinner, all of it, that was you protecting me, by being awful to me, by being the kind of boss no one would think you were close enough to be worth targeting. Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, the first real crack he'd heard in it since the day they met. I kept you exactly as far away from me as I could stand because every single time Darius has found someone I actually care about, he has found a way to ruin them. And I could survive being the woman you quit on. I don't know if I could survive being the reason he came after your daughter's insurance, or your credit, or the school she goes to the way he's done before. Somewhere down the hall, a floorboard creaked, and both of them went still, listening for a second door, a second set of footsteps. But the apartment stayed quiet. Just rain against glass and a radiator ticking as it cooled. Tell me why you came tonight, Malcolm said finally, instead of any other night in 18 months. Simone set the mug down. Her hands, he noticed, weren't quite steady. Because 2 hours ago Darius told the board he has proof I've been diverting company resources toward a personal project he intends to expose at Thursday's shareholder meeting, she said. And the personal project he's talking about is the medical trial fund I've been quietly financing for the past year under a name that isn't mine, for a girl with a rare kidney condition whose father works too many hours to know her treatments have been fully covered since last spring. The kitchen went very quiet. Malcolm felt something shift and drop in his chest, cold and enormous the way the floor feels when an elevator starts moving before you're braced for it. Zuri, he said. Her name is on the donor paperwork as anonymous, Simone said. But Darius has a copy of the account routing, and by Thursday he intends to make it look like I stole from my own shareholders to fund an affair with an employee. He doesn't care that it isn't true. He only cares that it will end my career and yours in the same afternoon, and that neither of us will have anywhere left to run to. Malcolm stared at her, at the rain-soaked shirt and the shaking hands and the suitcase sitting by his door like an apology she hadn't found the words for yet, and understood all at once that the woman he'd spent 18 months learning to despise had spent that same 18 months quietly keeping his daughter alive. Simone left before 6 o'clock the next morning, before Zuri woke, and Malcolm understood without being told that she didn't want his daughter to see her there. Not yet. Not until there was something solid enough to explain. She left a card on his kitchen counter with a number on it that wasn't the one from her office directory. And underneath it, in handwriting far less composed than her printed memos, She'd written, "Thank you for the coffee. I meant everything I said." He didn't call the number until Zuri was at school. "I want to help," he told her, standing in his kitchen with the same mug from the night before. "But I need to understand exactly what Darius has and exactly what he's planning to do with it before Thursday." "You don't work for me anymore," Simone said. "You don't have to do this." "I'm not doing it for you," Malcolm said, which wasn't entirely true, and they both seemed to know it. "I'm doing it because my daughter's medical records are apparently sitting in a folder on your brother's desk, and I would like to know how that happened before he decides to use them." There was a pause on the line, long enough that he thought the call had dropped. "There's a man named Leonard Price, an older black businessman whose silver hair and measured voice made him seem paternal to anyone who missed the calculation in his eyes," Simone said finally. "He was my father's business partner for 20 years before I was born, practically family. He sits on the board now. He has since my father died, and he's the one who taught Darius everything he knows about how to make a lie look like an audit finding. If you want to understand Darius, you have to understand that he learned cruelty from somewhere, and it wasn't from me. You believe Price is involved." "I think Price has been advising me on how to handle Darius for a year," Simone said. "And every single piece of advice he's given me has made things worse in a way that, in hindsight, looks less like bad luck and more like a pattern I was too grateful to see." Before the meeting, Malcolm walked Zuri to school beneath a sky scrubbed clean by the storm. She talked about the mystery dog and a spelling test, while he carried a secret that made every familiar block feel altered. At the school gate, she hugged him and told him she was glad he would be home for dinner. That simple sentence fixed his purpose more firmly than any corporate threat could. They met that afternoon in a diner in Decatur instead of anywhere near the Brooks Meridian Tower, a place with vinyl booths and a laminated menu, and no chance of running into anyone from either of their lives. Simone looked different out of her tailored suits, in jeans and a plain sweater, hair pulled back, and Malcolm found himself watching her more closely than he meant to, trying to reconcile the woman across the booth with the one who'd spent 18 months freezing him out one clipped sentence at a time. "Show me what you have," he said. She slid a folder across the table, thin, careful. Bank transfer records with her name scrubbed and replaced by an account she'd set up under a shell entity called New Dawn Trust. A copy of an email forwarded from an account Malcolm didn't recognize, laying out in cold administrative language how the routing number connected back to Simone Brooks within 3 clicks for anyone who knew where to look. "We need to identify who sent this to Darius," Malcolm asked. "I don't know," Simone said. "That's what frightens me. I've traced the money myself a dozen times, and I'm careful, Malcolm. I've been careful for a year specifically because I knew what would happen if anyone connected those dots. Whoever handed this to my brother either broke into systems that shouldn't be breakable or already had the access to look. Price has access to everything," Simone continued. "He has access to things even I don't have access to because my father trusted him with the company's original architecture before I was old enough to understand what a shell entity was. If he wanted to find New Dawn Trust, he wouldn't have needed to break anything. He'd have needed to remember." Malcolm turned the folder over in his hands, thinking of Zuri's dentist appointment, of the play he'd missed, of 18 months of a woman being cold to him on purpose so that nobody would think to look twice at either of them, and felt something harden in his chest that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the particular fury of watching someone try to hurt a child he loved. "I want to talk to Price," he said. "No." Simone's hand came down flat on the table, sharper than he'd ever heard her sound even in the office. "You do not go near Leonard Price. If he's behind this, the last thing we do is let him know we suspect it before Thursday. You confront a man like that with nothing solid. He doesn't panic, Malcolm. He adjusts. He's had 20 years of practice adjusting. Tell me what we do next." "We find out who actually sent that email to Darius," Simone said, "before the shareholder meeting, and we find a way to make sure whatever Darius reveals on Thursday reveals him instead." During those nights, the apartment became neutral ground. Simone left her expensive phone face down and drank coffee from the chipped braised mug. Malcolm noticed that she never complained about the cramped chairs or the radiator's uneven heat. Once, when Zuri called from her room, Simone stopped speaking before Malcolm even rose, respecting the child's sleep with an instinctive care that made his anger harder to keep simple. For 2 days, they worked from Malcolm's kitchen table after Zuri went to bed, Simone arriving quietly through the back stairwell, so the building's front desk wouldn't log a visitor with her name attached to it. The two of them cross-referencing server logs and old emails until the sky outside went from black to gray. Malcolm watched her work and started to understand things about her that 18 months in the same office had never shown him. The way she chewed the inside of her cheek when she was close to an answer, the way her voice softened without her seeming to notice when she talked about her father, the way she apologized quietly, more than once, for things that had nothing to do with what they were doing at the table. "You didn't have to protect me the way you did," he told her on the second night, both of them running on coffee and too little sleep. "There were other ways. You could have told me the truth from the start. I did not believe you would have trusted that warning." Simone asked. "A stranger tells you on your first week that her brother destroys anyone she trusts and asks you to let her treat you badly in public so he doesn't notice you exist. I gave you the version of the truth I thought you could survive without me having to watch you decide whether or not to believe it. That wasn't your decision to make for me." "No," she agreed quietly. "It wasn't. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I'm asking you to help me stop Thursday from happening, and then you can be as angry with me as you want." By the third night, they had a name. A junior analyst in the finance department, a young black woman named Keisha Grant, had pulled the New Dawn Trust record 11 days earlier under a system access code that traced back to Leonard Price's assistant. Keisha herself had no idea what the records were for. She'd been told it was a routine audit request and had simply done her job. "That's it," Malcolm said, staring at the log. "That's the threat. If we can get her to confirm on record that Price's office requested this, specifically before Darius ever had it, then it stops being Simone Brooks hiding money and starts being Leonard Price manufacturing a scandal using information he had no legitimate reason to pull. It should have been enough. It should have been the moment the two of them sat back and let the plan hold, let it breathe, waited for Thursday with the quiet confidence of people who had found the seam in another man's life. Instead, on the fourth night, Malcolm made the mistake that would cost them both far more than either of them expected. He went to see Darius alone. He told himself it was reconnaissance. He told himself he only wanted to gauge how much Darius actually knew, to see if there was room to negotiate a delay before Thursday, to buy Simone time to get Keisha's statement on record properly instead of rushing it. He didn't tell Simone because some old, stubborn part of him didn't want to be the man who needed permission to protect his own daughter, and because 18 months of learning to distrust the Brooks Meridian's chain of command had taught him to believe he could read a room better alone than with someone else's history sitting beside him at the table. Darius received him in a private club on the 52nd floor of a building 2 blocks from Brooks Meridian, all dark wood and low lighting, and greeted Malcolm with the easy warmth of a man who had never once needed to raise his voice to get what he wanted. "Malcolm Reed," Darius said, rising to shake his hand like they were old colleagues instead of two men circling the same landmine. "I have to say, I didn't expect you to come find me. I assume Simone does not know you are here." "I'm here on my own," Malcolm said, which was true, and which he would spend the next 2 days regretting having said out loud. "Sit," Darius said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Drink. I want to know what you actually have," Malcolm said, staying on his feet, "and what it would take for you to let this go." Darius's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes sharpened, the way a predator's does when prey walks toward it instead of away. "You mean the medical fund?" Darius said. "The one financed through an account with your daughter's insurance provider listed as a direct beneficiary. That fund is not what you intend to tell the board it is." Darius tilted his head, almost gentle, almost sympathetic, and that was the worst part, how sympathetic he sounded. A CEO diverting resources to benefit an employee's family. "I don't need it to be an affair, Malcolm. I only need it to look like preferential treatment funded with money that wasn't hers to spend that way. The board doesn't need the whole truth. They need enough doubt to vote. You would use a 6-year-old's medical care to win a boardroom fight. I do a great deal to protect what our father built," Darius said, and for one unguarded second, something raw moved across his face. Something that looked less like ambition and more like old, Unhealed grief, gone again before Malcolm could be sure he'd seen it. You have no idea what it's like watching someone hand you nothing your whole life and then act shocked when you take what should have been yours to begin with. That's not an answer. No, Darius agreed. It isn't. But it's the only one you're getting tonight. He rose, buttoned his jacket, and something about the calm, unhurried way he did it made the back of Malcolm's neck go cold. You should also know, before you leave, that this conversation is on record. Every word. Consider it insurance in case you or my sister ever decide to claim I acted alone in any of this. Malcolm felt the floor drop out from under the evening in one slow, sickening lurch. You recorded me. I recorded a man threatening to expose confidential company matters unless I halted a legitimate board inquiry, Darius said pleasantly. Which is, I imagine, close enough to what happened here tonight to matter a great deal on Thursday. Thank you for coming, Malcolm. I do think this helps my case more than yours. Malcolm left the club with his hands shaking and a feeling in his chest like he'd handed Darius a weapon and painted a target on it himself. And it wasn't until he was 3 blocks away, standing in the cold with his phone lighting up with a call from Simone he hadn't answered yet, that the second, larger horror arrived, quieter but far worse than the first. Because as he replayed the conversation in his head, one line kept surfacing above the rest, catching on something in his memory he couldn't place until he was almost home. You have no idea what it's like watching someone hand you nothing your whole life. Darius hadn't said that like a man defending an inheritance. He'd said it like a man reciting a line someone else had taught him in the exact rhythm, the exact cadence that Malcolm had heard once before. 3 nights earlier, reading over Simone's shoulder through an old email chain neither of them had thought twice about at the time. An email from Leonard Price to Simone's father, 14 years old, arguing against naming her the sole heir to the company. Malcolm stood on the sidewalk with his phone still buzzing in his hand and understood, with the particular sick clarity of a puzzle piece finally turning the right way, that Darius wasn't the architect of any of this. He was the weapon someone else had spent 20 years sharpening. Simone answered on the first ring when Malcolm finally called her back. And he told her everything, standing on the sidewalk with his breath fogging in the cold. The recording, the line Darius had used, the memory of Price's email surfacing like something rising out of dark water. He used my father's words, Simone said, and her voice had gone very flat, very careful, the way it did in the office right before she made a decision that cost someone something. Price said that same thing to my father when I was 19, almost word for word. I remember because my father repeated it to me afterward, trying to be kind about it, try to explain why an old friend didn't think a daughter should run a company built by men. You believe Price fed Darius that line on purpose? I think Price has spent 20 years telling my brother a story about what he's owed, Simone said. And tonight you handed him a recording that makes it sound like I sent an employee to threaten him into silence. You need to understand what your choice has done, Malcolm. I was trying to protect my daughter. I know that. Her voice cracked, just slightly, the same crack he'd heard in his kitchen 4 nights earlier. I know that's why you went, but you didn't ask me. And now, Thursday isn't about a fund I've never hidden well enough. It's about whether I sent a man to intimidate a board member, and that is so much easier for them to believe. They didn't speak again until the following afternoon, and when they did, it was in the diner in Decatur again, both of them looking like they'd slept in shifts instead of at the same time. Keisha Grant sat across from them in the booth, 26 years old and visibly frightened, twisting a paper napkin into a tight coil between her fingers. I didn't know what the records were for, Keisha said. Mr. Price's assistant told me it was routine. I do a dozen of these a week. I never thought. You're not in trouble, Simone said gently. And Malcolm watched something in the younger woman's shoulders drop half an inch at the words. I need you to tell the board exactly what you told us. When the request came in, who it came from, and that it happened 11 days before my brother ever mentioned New Dawn Trust to anyone. If I do that, Mr. Price will know it was me. Yes, Simone said. He will. Keisha looked between them for a long moment, at Malcolm's exhausted face and Simone's steady one. And something in her expression shifted from fear into something harder, more resolved. He made me feel like I did something wrong for just doing my job, Keisha said. I'll tell them. Malcolm dressed slowly that morning. He chose the dark suit he had worn to his wife's funeral and then to Zuri's first day of school, a suit reserved for moments when fear had to be carried without being displayed. Tasha stayed with Zuri and made him promise that whatever happened in the tower, he would come home knowing his daughter's future did not belong to a board. Thursday arrived gray and cold, the kind of late autumn morning that made the glass tower on Peachtree Street look like it was made of ice. Malcolm wasn't supposed to be in the building at all, wasn't an employee anymore, had no reason to be standing in the back of the 40th floor boardroom except that Simone had asked him to be there quietly, near the door, in case Darius tried anything before the vote. Darius opened with the recording. He played it for the room without warning, Malcolm's own voice filling the boardroom, flattened and stripped of context. I want to know what you actually have and what it would take for you to let this go. And Malcolm felt every set of eyes in the room turn toward him at once. Felt the particular exposure of being made a villain in a story he hadn't agreed to be cast in. My sister sent her employee's former subordinate to threaten me, Darius said once the recording finished, into a silence so complete Malcolm could hear the building's ventilation system humming overhead. I have never claimed she was diverting company funds for anything but personal benefit. Now we have proof of exactly how far she's willing to go to keep that benefit hidden. Simone stood. She didn't look at Malcolm first. She looked at the board, at the dozen faces around the long table, some sympathetic, most carefully neutral. And Malcolm watched her find the same stillness she'd worn in her office the day he quit. Except now, he understood it wasn't coldness at all. It was the particular calm of a person who had spent her whole life learning not to let anyone see her flinch. I'd like to play something as well, Simone said, before this board makes any decision based on a recording made without my knowledge or consent in a private club of a man who no longer worked for this company and had every right to ask questions about his own daughter's medical information appearing in a boardroom presentation. She nodded to the associate at the back, and the room filled with Keisha Grant's recorded statement, her voice small but steady, laying out dates and access codes, and the 11 days that separated Price's request from Darius's accusation, a timeline that made it plainly, mathematically impossible for Simone to have hidden anything from a brother who'd had the information before she ever knew he was looking. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Several board members turned, slow and deliberate, toward Leonard Price, seated at the far end of the table in the same gray suit he'd worn to every meeting Malcolm had ever glimpsed him in. His expression unreadable. "This is absurd," Price said before anyone asked him anything. A junior analyst's confused account of a routine request hardly constitutes. Keisha Grant didn't request anything on her own initiative, Simone said. Your assistant did, using your credentials 11 days before my brother had this information. I'd like to know how a routine audit request from your office ended up as an accusation of an affair in Darius's hands 11 days later, Elias. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks less like a coincidence and more like a plan you've been running since before my father died. For the first time in the meeting, Price's composure slipped, just slightly. A tightening at the corner of his mouth that Malcolm recognized because he'd seen its twin on Darius's face 4 nights earlier in the club. Your father should never have left you this company, Price said, quiet now, no longer performing for the room. I told him that. I told him a company this size needed someone who understood what real pressure looked like. Not a girl who'd spent her 20s being protected from every hard decision he made. And you decided my brother was that person instead, Simone said. Except Darius wasn't protecting our father's legacy, was he? He was doing what you taught him because you needed a cross running this company who'd let you keep running it from behind him the way you never got to run it from behind my father. Darius, who had been standing at the head of the table with the particular stillness of a man watching his own foundation crack beneath him, turned toward Price with an expression Malcolm hadn't seen on him before, something younger, something closer to hurt than anger. You told me this was about fairness, Darius said. You told me she'd never earned this the way I have. Price started. You gave me the line about Dad handing her everything, Darius said, quieter now, almost to himself. I thought that was mine. I thought I came up with that on my own. The room held its breath around the two of them, and Malcolm, standing near the door, where nobody was paying him any attention now, watched Darius's face do something complicated. The slow, unpracticed work of a man realizing the resentment he'd built his whole adult life around had been handed to him piece by someone who needed him angry more than he needed him right. For several seconds after Darius spoke, nobody reached for a microphone or shuffled a page. The silence was not mercy. It was recognition. Leonard had treated the grief of one black family as leverage, teaching a son to resent a daughter until both could be controlled. Simone did not gloat. Her face held sorrow for the years no vote could return. Malcolm understood, then, that winning would not make her untouched. It would only give her the freedom to begin healing honestly. The vote, when it finally came, was not close. Leonard Price was removed from the board within the hour. His access revoked before the meeting had fully adjourned. And Darius, hushed and silent, was asked by two board members to step outside with counsel to discuss what came next. He didn't fight it. He walked out of the room the way a man walks out of a burning building, not looking back, not looking anywhere but straight ahead. Simone found Malcolm in the hallway afterward, both of them drained in the particular way that only follows the release of a fear you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. "You shouldn't have gone to Darius alone," she said. "I need you to know that. What you did put both of us at risk, and I'm still angry about it even now." "I know," Malcolm said. "I am sorry. I wasn't trying to take the decision out of your hand. I was trying to protect my daughter, and I didn't stop to think that protecting her and trusting you weren't the same thing I needed to choose between." "They weren't," Simone said. "But I understand why it felt that way. I spent a year and a half teaching you that trusting me came with a cost. I don't get to be surprised when you hesitated to hand me something this important." They stood in the hallway a long moment, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, the sound of the boardroom slowly emptying behind them. Two people who had spent 4 days working side by side at a kitchen table and had somehow, in the middle of trying to save a company and a child's medical care and a family that had been quietly falling apart for 20 years, stopped being boss and employee and started being something neither of them had a name for yet. "I keep thinking about what happens to Darius," Malcolm asked. "I don't know," Simone said. "He's still my brother. He did something unforgivable, and he was also lied to for most of his adult life by a man our father trusted more than either of us. I don't think those two things cancel each other out. I think I have to hold both of them and figure out what that means later when I'm not standing in a hallway that smells like burnt coffee." Malcolm almost laughed, surprising himself with it, the first easy thing he'd felt in days. In the weeks after the meeting, Simone rebuilt more than a board. She placed the medical fund under an independent foundation, protected every family record, and invited outside auditors to examine the accounts. She offered Malcolm his former position with better hours and written boundaries. He declined the old role, but accepted a consulting contract that let him work from home and meet Zuri at the school gate. Simone accepted his terms without bargaining. It was the first apology she made through action rather than language. That evening, 3 weeks later than either of them expected, Simone showed up at Malcolm's door again. This time in the daylight, without a suitcase, without rain, with a small wrapped box under one arm that turned out to hold a stuffed dog for Zuri, and, tucked beneath the ribbon, where only Malcolm would find it, a folded note that said nothing about the company at all. Zuri answered the door before Malcolm got there, small and fearless the way 6-year-olds are, and looked up at Simone with the frank, assessing stare of a child deciding whether an adult could be trusted. "You are the boss lady," Zuri said. "I was," Simone said, crouching down to Zuri's height, careful and unpracticed in a way Malcolm hadn't expected from her. "I'm trying not to be anymore. Your dad quit, remember?" "He did," Zuri said, considering this. "I think you came here to say sorry." "I am," Simone said. "It's going to take a while. I hope you can give me that time." Zuri looked back at her father, who was standing in the kitchen doorway with an expression he wasn't trying very hard to hide, and something in Zuri's face settled. The particular quick certainty of a child reading the room correctly before either adult had said a word out loud. "You can come in," Zuri said, stepping back from the door. but you have to read the dog book with us. It's really good. Simone looked up at Malcolm over Zuri's head, something open and uncertain and hopeful crossing her face. None of the careful glass composure she'd worn for 18 months in an office on the 41st floor. And Malcolm found himself stepping back from the doorway the same way he had that first rain-soaked night. Except this time, there was no envelope of 11 weeks of savings sitting on the counter. No fear underneath the invitation. Just the quiet, unfamiliar relief of a life that had finally stopped being something he had to survive on his own. "Come on in," he said. "But she's serious about the dog book.